So this HOA president literally storms into my grandfather's cabin, screaming about property violations while I'm sitting there having coffee with the state governor. She just committed 7 felonies in front of the one person who could shut down her entire criminal operation. Zero clue who she just interrupted. Zero clue that her illegal $8 million lakeside development was about to become a federal case. 6 months ago, I thought Barbara Mitchell was just your typical power-drunk HOA president. Turns out she was running an environmental crime ring that was destroying protected wetlands and stealing lakefront property through systematic harassment. And I was about to accidentally burn her entire empire to the ground. Let me back up. My name is Jack Morrison. Everyone calls me Wolf. 58 years old. Retired Marine after 20 years, including 2 tours as a sniper instructor. My grandfather's fishing cabin on Crystal Lake, 2 acres of heaven that Pop bought in 1959 for $900. Hand-hewn logs, stone fireplace, and a porch overlooking water so clear you could count rocks at 20 feet. Then Barbara Mitchell arrived like a hurricane in Gucci heels, 54 years old. Drove a white Mercedes with vanity plates reading Rules 1 and wore her HOA president badge like a general's star. Her mission: transform Crystal Lake into an exclusive resort community. 3 elderly families had already sold their cabins at below-market prices within 2 months of her arrival. Her first act of war came on a Tuesday morning. I'm drinking coffee, watching an eagle teach its young to fish, when I hear designer heels clicking on my dock at 6:30 a.m. She's taping this official notice to my door while Frank Davis takes photos. Violation citation. Unauthorized structure, violating lakefront aesthetic standards. Fine. $2,000. Immediate compliance, required within 48 hours, or daily penalties will accrue at $500 per day. My grandfather's cabin, built 6 years before Barbara existed, was threatening aesthetic standards. I walked over to explain my property predates the HOA by 40 years with grandfather rights. Her response: everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetheart. Ask the Henderson family how well fighting me worked out. De Henderson's elderly neighbors, who'd mysteriously downsized last month after 31 years. Pop's voice echoed. When someone wants your land bad enough, find out why. Barbara circled my cabin like a vulture, photographing everything. By week's end, I had 5 more citations. Unauthorized solar panels installed 15 years ago with permits. Unpermitted dock built by Pop in 1962. Illegal well operation water-eyed drunk my entire life. 3 days after my deadline passed, a certified letter arrived from Blackstone and Associates. Legal gibberish, saying I owed $15,000 in retroactive fees and threatening a property lien. I drove to the county courthouse. Betty, the clerk who remembered Pop, helped me pull original surveys. My deed from 1959 included 75 feet into the lake. That dock was sitting in my water. The HOA wasn't established until 2003, 44 years after Pop bought the land. But here's the kicker. A recent application for Crystal Lake Resort Development Project. $8 million development plan for the Eastern Shore. The applicant, Lakeside Properties, LLC. Registered agent, Barbara Mitchell. Everything clicked. This wasn't about aesthetics. Barbara needed my land for her development. The Eastern Shore project couldn't proceed without access through my property. Armed with copies, I drove back. Barbara's Mercedes and Frank's truck were blocking my driveway. Not beside it, blocking it. We're conducting a community safety inspection. This might take several hours, she said through a gap in her window. Frank stood there, arms crossed. Ex-cop, probably fired for attitude problems. You're blocking private property access, Primera Saeed calmly. Move in 2 minutes, or I'm calling the sheriff. The sheriff is my brother-in-law. Frank smirked. Good luck with that, jarhead. I pulled out my phone and started recording. For the record, you're blocking legal access. This is criminal trespass and intentional obstruction. They moved. But the message was clear. This was war. Within days, she organized the Crystal Lake Preservation Committee, basically a hit squad. Neighbors who'd waved at me for years crossed the street. Her Facebook posts were passive-aggressive warfare, concerned about certain properties, refusing community standards. But Tom Garcia, a documentary filmmaker 2 cabins down, pulled me aside. "Wolf, Barbara's running a protection racket. Hit me for $5,000 in fees that never happened. When I questioned it, 12 violations appeared. She's doing this to everyone who won't sell." That night, orange spray paint on my mailbox, "Sell or suffer." My hidden security camera caught Barbara's license plate at 2:47 a.m. Deputy Mike Reynolds, honest cop, Army veteran, took the footage. That's vandalism and criminal intimidation. But Barbara Mitchell has serious connections. Her husband is the state development commissioner. This is gonna be uphill. I've fought uphill battles before, usually with people shooting at me. Barbara weaponized every county agency. Building Inspector Dale Morrison Guyad helped during a fire evacuation showed up looking awkward. 3 hours later, everything exceeded code standards. "Whoever filed this is wasting everyone's time," Deli muttered. Environmental officer, fire marshal, each inspection clean. But each false report created a paper trail, making me look like a problem owner. Then Barbara got local news involved. Channel 7 featured her as concerned citizen protecting the environment. Carefully angled photos made my cabin look abandoned. She stood on my dock while delivering her performance. But she got greedy. My daughter Sarah, 16, and passionate about conservation, investigated. Within 48 hours, Sarah discovered Barbara's development had never filed required environmental impact statements. The project would destroy 3 acres of protected wetlands. Sarah posted her findings everywhere. HOA president claims environmental concern while planning illegal development. 20,000 shares in 3 days. Suddenly, Barbara was fighting an army of activists. My friend, Linda Chun, environmental lawyer, JAG Corps veteran, called "Wolf, Barbara's project violates the Clean Water Act, wetlands protection, and endangered species regulations. There's a nesting pair of bald eagles on that eastern shore." Eagles? Protected by federal law. You can't develop within 500 feet of a nest. Barbara's plans show construction within 200 feet. That's a federal crime, up to $100,000 in fines and 2 years in prison. That night on Pop's porch, I thought about my next move. Pop's voice. "Sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight." I made a call I'd avoided for 3 years. "Governor's office, how may I direct your call?" "This is Jack Morrison for Governor Tell her Wolf needs to talk about Crystal Lake." Governor Helen Crawford. I'd saved her son's life in Iraq when his convoy got ambushed. She'd told me, "If you ever need anything, Wolf, call me directly." 3 years later, I was calling in that favor, because Barbara Mitchell was about to learn that some battles you can't win, some enemies you shouldn't make, and some Marines don't forget how to fight. But Barbara wasn't waiting. Her next move was full character assassination. A Facebook post that made my stomach drop. Urgent safety warning. Aggressive veteran behavior threatening Crystal Lake families. Veteran crises. #ProtectaraKids. Veteran crisis. She was using my military service as a weapon, implying I was unstable PTSD case. 97 shares within hours. Comments from obviously fake accounts. Stock photos created within the past week. Then she filed for a restraining order. The petition painted me as unhinged, making death threats complete fiction. Tom Garcia showed up with camera equipment. "Wolf, I've been documenting everything for a documentary. Barbara's done this in 3 other communities. Same pattern, same tactics. Federal investigators have been watching Crystal Lake for 6 months. They knew about the illegal development. They suspected, but they needed someone inside willing to testify. Someone who couldn't be intimidated, someone like a Marine." That's when I understood. I'd accidentally become the linchpin in a federal investigation into environmental corruption across multiple states. What do they need? Keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Don't back down. Testify when the time comes. But Barbara escalated. Someone cut my water line. Professional sabotage. 2 days later, solar panels damaged. Repairs cost $3,400. Then, false police reports. Suspicious activity. Possible weapons cache. Loud noises, domestic disturbance. Each report brought deputies to my door. Deputy Reynolds would show up, check things, leave apologetically. "Wolf, I know this is harassment, but I have to respond. Just hang in there." While Barbara focused on destroying me, Sarah was building the case that would destroy her. My 16-year-old had turned into a one-woman investigation unit. Dad, Luke, Barbara's company received a $2 million state grant for environmental restoration, but there's no record of any work. The money disappeared. That's embezzlement. That's a felony. And she filed statements claiming no significant wildlife habitat. But Forest Service records show active eagle nesting for 12 years. She lied on federal documents. The evidence Sarah compiled was devastating. Fraudulent grants, falsified assessments, shell companies, systematic harassment documented through social media. "This isn't just HOA harassment," Sarah said. "This is organized crime disguised as community governance." Governor Crawford's visit was scheduled for the next morning at 9 a.m. She'd bring the state environmental prosecutor to FBI agents and media for new environmental protection legislation. "We're using your cabin as the backdrop," she explained. "Symbolism matters. We're announcing protections where both homeowners and wilderness were violated." Linda Chun added, "Barbara's pattern suggests she tried to disrupt any official activity. Her need for control will override common sense. And when she does, we'll have everything documented. Federal agents on site. Witnesses her own followers watching her commit felonies in real time." That night I cleaned Pop's cabin until it shined. Not from Same, but so Barbara could see exactly what she'd been trying to destroy. Honest craftsmanship. Family legacy. Tom set up hidden cameras. Federal agents positioned audio surveillance. Deputy Reynolds nearby in case things got physical. Sarah made a prediction. Barbara's going to live stream it. She needs her followers to validate her authority. She broadcast her own downfall, thinking she's exposing corruption. At 8:30 a.m., Governor Crawford arrived. She looked at my cabin with appreciation. "Wolf, this is exactly what we're protecting. This is what America used to mean." We were setting up when I heard it. Barbara's Mercedes roaring up my driveway. Gravel spraying, Frank's truck behind her. "This is it. Everyone." Barbara's voice carried through windows. She was live streaming. "We're about to expose corruption. The governor is illegally conspiring with a property owner refusing to follow standards." Governor Crawford smiled calmly. "Some people never learn that real power doesn't need to be announced. It just is." Barbara's heels clicked aggressively across my porch, through the window. Her face was red with fury, eyes wild with zealous certainty. "Wolf Morrison, come out and face the consequences." FBI agents positioned around exchanged glances. Subject is on scene, preparing for contact. "Should I answer?" I asked. Governor let her make the first move. Let her commit. What happened next was so perfectly Barbara you couldn't script it. She kicked down my door. Wood splintered. She'd literally kicked it down in a $3,000 suit and pearls. Live streaming to 4,000 followers. Barbara stormed in. Phone held high. "I demand to know why the governor is secretly meeting with this man. This is political corruption." Governor Crawford stood slowly, calmly, displayed her credentials. The look on Barbara's face was priceless. "Mrs. Mitchell," Governor Crawford said in a voice that could freeze water, "I am Governor Helen Crawford. You just committed breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and destruction of private property. Your followers just watched you do it." Barbara's phone was still streaming. Her comments section exploded. "Oh my God, is that the governor? Barbara, what are you doing? Delete this before you get arrested." This is. I have authority here. I'm HOA president. I have jurisdiction." Ma'am, you have zero jurisdiction over state officials on private property. FBI agent Rebecca Torres stepped through the doorway, and you've just committed several federal offenses in front of multiple law enforcement officers. Frank Davis, behind Barbara, suddenly wanted to disappear. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Torres continued, pulling out her badge. I'm with the FBI Environmental Crimes Division. We've been investigating your development for 6 months. Thanks to your livestream, we now have documented evidence of your harassment campaign. This is harassment of me. This is political persecution. Actually, Governor Crawford said, your husband resigned this morning after we showed him evidence of his involvement in your grant fraud scheme. He's cooperating with investigators. The color drained from Barbara's face. Robert ... what? Your husband, faced with federal fraud charges, decided protecting you wasn't worth 20 years in federal prison. Barbara's eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape. Don't even think about it, Deputy Reynolds said, stepping into view. You're surrounded by law enforcement, live streaming your own arrest, with 4,000 witnesses watching you implode. Barbara kept digging. This is all Wolf Morrison's fault. He refused to sell. He's a dangerous veteran who threatened everyone. Ma'am, I said quietly, I'm a decorated Marine who served 20 years protecting people's rights, including your right to make a fool of yourself on social media. The comments section was pure chaos. Someone called her a lawyer. Best HOA meltdown ever. Can't believe I wasted 3 years thinking she was protecting us. Agent Torres pulled out handcuffs. Barbara Michel, you're under arrest for fraud, environmental crimes, extortion, harassment, and about 15 other charges. You have the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you exercise. The sound of handcuffs clicking, shut, echoed through my cabin. Barbara's phone clattered to the floor, still streaming, capturing her shocked expression. Frank tried to slip away, but Deputy Reynolds blocked him. Mr. Davis, we need to talk about your role. You're not under arrest yet, but I strongly suggest you cooperate. Frank looked at Barbara in handcuffs, at the organs, and made the smartest decision of his life. I'll tell you everything. She made me do it. I've got records, recordings, everything. As they led Barbara past me, she hissed. This isn't over. My lawyers will destroy all of you. You haven't won. Ma'am, Governor Crawford said, you've just confessed to multiple crimes on live stream in front of the governor, federal agents, and 4,000 witnesses. Your lawyers aren't magicians. You're going to federal prison. Barbara's live stream ended, but the footage had already been downloaded by hundreds. Within an hour, #Christella Karen was trending nationally. She really destroyed herself on camera, Sarah said. This is going to be studied in law schools as an example of how not to commit crimes. Governor Crawford proceeded with the press conference like nothing unusual happened. Today, we're announcing the Crystal Lake Protection Act. This legislation protects homeowners from HOA harassment and establishes severe penalties for officials who abuse authority. Behind her, my cabin stood as proof that some things were worth protecting. The journalists ate it up. Decorated Marines, ancestral property saved from corrupt news outlets played Barbara's footage on loop. Watch HOA President's epic meltdown became the most watched video that week. Social media was merciless. Memes appeared within hours. But the real story unfolded behind the scenes. FBI executed search warrants on Barbara's home, office, and HOA headquarters. What they found made my harassment look like child's play. Agent Torres briefed me 3 days later. Wolf, Barbara's operation was bigger than we imagined. Same scheme in 4 other states, over 12 years, systematically targeting elderly property owners, harassing them until they sold cheap, then flipping properties. How much money? Conservative estimate. $8 million in profits. But the environmental crimes are worse. 17 acres of protected wetlands destroyed across 3 states. Falsified reports, bribed officials. And she got away with it for 12 years, until she picked a fight with a Marine who knew how to fight back. You know what sealed her fate? That live stream. Defense attorneys can't argue with video of their client confessing while committing new crimes. The federal case was overwhelming, but what really destroyed her was the community response. Once people understood, the floodgates opened. Tom Garcia's documentary, The HOA Con, premiered 2 weeks later. 3 years of footage showing her tactics. Former neighbors came forward with stories that made mine look mild. The Hendersons testified Barbara threatened to report their granddaughter's online business as illegal unless they accepted her lowball offer. Mr. Chun described false elder abuse reports filed against his daughter to pressure him into selling. Mrs. Patterson explained how Barbara manufactured a septic emergency, costing $12,000, repairs that were completely unnecessary but left her financially devastated. Each story painted the same picture: systematic, calculated harassment of vulnerable people for profit. Barbara hadn't just broken laws. She'd destroyed lives. But karma was serving Barbara a meal she'd never forget. Environmental charges carried 20-year maximums. Fraud charges added 15. Extortion, harassment, civil rights violations stacked up. Her husband Robert's cooperation made things worse. He'd kept detailed records, apparently for leverage if their marriage went south. Now those were prosecution exhibits. She kept spreadsheets, Robert testified, target lists of property owners with vulnerable situations. She'd rate them by likelihood to sell under pressure. She called it property acquisition management. I called it elder abuse for profit. The prosecution's evidence included emails where Barbara wrote, "Target the Henderson property harder. They're both over 75. Another 6 months of harassment, and they'll break." Meanwhile, Crystal Lake was healing. The new volunteer association was everything Barbara wasn't: transparent, supportive, focused on actual community building. Property values didn't collapse like Barbara warned. They increased. Turned out, people wanted to live where neighbors helped each other instead of harassing each other. Tom organized a Crystal Lake Recovery Festival, celebration and healing event. Over 300 people showed up. Sarah set up an environmental education booth about eagle conservation. The irony wasn't lost. Barbara claimed environmental concern while planning to destroy habitats. Governor Crowford announced a $500,000 state grant for Crystal Lake conservation. Money that would actually be used for conservation. "Wolf," she told me, "you did something remarkable. You stood up to a bully with money, connections, and political power. You showed that regular people can fight corruption and win. I just didn't want to lose my grandfather's cabin. And in saving your cabin, you saved this entire lake and exposed a criminal network operating across multiple states. That's heroism. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it's right." Barbara's trial was scheduled for 6 months later. She rejected multiple plea offers, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. The defendant systematically targeted vulnerable homeowners, destroyed protected habitats, defrauded agencies of millions, and when finally kicked down a door and committed new crimes while live streaming. This isn't complex. This is a defendant who documented her own criminality. Barbara's defense tried arguing she was unfairly targeted. That argument died when prosecutors played her live stream showing her committing felonies. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, "the defendant wants you to believe she's a victim. Let's watch her victimize herself." They played Barbara's stream on courtroom screens. Every juror watched her kick down my door, scream at the governor, resist arrest. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day brought new revelations. Shell companies, falsified documents, systematic targeting of elderly owners, bribery of officials. Frank Davis testified for the prosecution, detailing Barbara's instructions to harass homeowners. She'd give me lists of properties to surveil. If I couldn't find real violations, she'd tell me to find creative interpretations. Creative interpretations. Making up rules that didn't exist. Threatening people for things that were completely legal. She'd say, "Frank, I don't pay you to find reasons people can stay. I pay you to find reasons they have to go." The jury was out for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all 47 counts. Guilty. Barbara showed no emotion as verdicts were read. She just sat there, probably believing her lawyers would fix everything on appeal. They wouldn't. Sentencing came 2 months later. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison had a reputation for tough sentences in environmental cases. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Morrison began, you systematically terrorized vulnerable people for profit. You destroyed protected habitats. You defrauded agencies. You abused community trust to facilitate criminal enterprise. When confronted, you committed new crimes rather than accepting responsibility. I've reviewed your entire criminal history. We found evidence of similar schemes in Oregon, Montana, and Colorado. You're not an overzealous HOA president. You're a career criminal who uses HOA positions as cover. The sentence? 18 years. In federal prison. $8.3 million in restitution. Lifetime ban from any HOA governance. Forfeiture of all properties gained through criminal activity. 18 years. Barbara would be 72 when released. The courtroom was silent as marshals led her away. No dramatic outburst. Just chains and closing doors. Outside the courthouse, victims gathered: the Hendersons, Mr. Chun, Mrs. Patterson, Tom, Sarah, Linda, Deputy Reynolds. People whose lives Barbara tried to destroy. Justice, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. After 43 years of following rules and being kind, I'd almost lost faith that justice existed. Thank you, Wolf, for fighting when the rest of us were too scared or tired. I didn't do it alone. Sarah found evidence. Tom documented everything. Linda handled legal strategy. Mike protected us. This was community action. The aftermath took years to resolve. Barbara's properties were seized and auctioned for victim restitution. Her $1.2 million mansion became a community center. Her Mercedes was sold to benefit the Hendersons. The Eastern Shore development was permanently blocked. Governor Crawford worked with conservation groups to purchase the land, creating Crystal Lake Wildlife Preserve. The eagle nesting area became protected habitat forever. Robert Mitchell disappeared into witness protection after testifying against Barbara's coke. His testimony led to 17 additional arrests. Frank Davis lost his security license and spent 6 months in county jail. Last I heard, he was working at a car wash, staying far from HOA properties. Tom's documentary won awards and became required viewing in law schools studying HOA corruption. It sparked a national movement for HOA reform. Sarah's environmental activism earned her a full scholarship to study conservation biology. She's now with the State Environmental Agency, protecting other lakes from people like Barbara. Linda Chun expanded her practice to focus specifically on HOA abuse cases. She's helped over 200 families fight corrupt boards using strategies we developed. And me? I'm still on Pop's porch, drinking coffee and watching eagles teach their young to fish. The cabin Barbara tried to steal is now on the National Register of Historic Places, protected forever. Crystal Lake became a destination for people who want to see what environmental protection and community cooperation can accomplish. Property values increased 42% after Barbara's conviction. Ethical governance is actually good for everyone. The volunteer association we formed has no mandatory fees, no citation authority, no power-hungry presidents. Just neighbors helping neighbors maintain one of the most beautiful places on earth. Governor Crawford still visits once a year for the Crystal Lake Conservation Festival. She calls it checking on the place where we proved that corruption loses when good people refuse to back down. But the sweetest victory. Last month, I got a letter from Barbara in federal prison. She'd apparently spent 3 years finally understanding what she'd done. The letter was different from anything she'd said before. Mr. Morrison, I destroyed lives for money I didn't need. I terrorized elderly people who'd never harmed anyone. I abused power I should never have had. There's no apology sufficient for what I did. I'm writing not to ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing to say you were right to fight back. Some of us become monsters. Some like you stop monsters. Thank you for stopping me before I hurt more people. I showed Sarah the letter. What do you think? Is it real? Does it matter? She's in prison for 18 years. The lake is protected. The family's got justice. Whether she's genuinely sorry or performing for parole boards, the outcome's the same. Pop would say, "Forgiveness isn't about whether people deserve it. It's about not letting their poison continue hurting you." I never wrote back. Not from spite, but because there was nothing left to say. Barbara had been a force of destruction, disguised as community leadership. She'd lost everything. Freedom, money, respect, family. That was consequence, not revenge. The real victory wasn't Barbara's imprisonment. It was watching Crystal Lake heal, eagles nesting in protected habitat, families swimming in clean water, kids learning conservation, elderly neighbors sitting on porches without fear of harassment. Pub's words echo across the water every morning. The land picks you, wolf. And once it picks you, you fight for it, because land remembers who protected it and who tried to destroy it. Crystal Lake remembered. Barbara Mitchell would be remembered as the woman who tried to destroy paradise for profit. I'd be remembered as the Marine who wouldn't let her. 5 years after Barbara's conviction, Crystal Lake had transformed into something she never could have imagined. A thriving example of what community actually means when it's not run by tyrants with clipboards. The morning started like any other, sitting on Pop's porch, watching sunrise paint the water gold, when Tom pulled into my driveway with news. "Wolf, you need to see this." Tom held up his phone. Barbara filed for early release. Compassionate grounds. Says she's terminally ill and wants to spend final months with family. Stage 4, cancer. 6 months to live. Requesting compassionate release after serving 5 years of age. The old me felt that familiar anger rising, but Pop's voice cut through. Being angry at dying people is like being angry at rain. It happens whether you approve or not. Question is, what kind of man do you want to be when it happens? Sarah drove up from the capital that weekend. "Dad, Barbara destroyed lives. She deserves punishment, but is there value in keeping her in prison to die? What does that accomplish?" "Justice," I said, but the word felt hollow. Is it? Justice was her conviction. The restitution, the reforms. Keeping a dying woman locked up for 6 more months. That's not justice. That's cruelty wearing justice's mask. Linda had stronger opinions. Wolf, Barbara terrorized people, destroyed habitats, ran a criminal enterprise for a decade. Has she shown genuine remorse? She wrote me a letter 3 years ago. Seemed genuine. 1 letter in 3 years. That's performance art. But here's what matters. This isn't about her. It's about you. Can you live with opposing her release? Can you live with supporting it? Either answer is valid. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Same judge who sentenced Barbara. I had the right to submit a victim impact statement either way. I spent those weeks thinking about Pop, about the cabin, about what justice really meant. Sometimes the mission isn't destroying the enemy. It's protecting what matters. Crystal Lake was protected. Families compensated. Reforms in place. Barbara's empire dismantled. Everything that mattered had been accomplished. Keeping her in prison wouldn't add to those victories. I wrote my statement at Pop's old desk. The words came easily. Your Honor, Barbara Mitchell committed serious crimes that harmed my family and community. She deserves the punishment she received. However, the purpose was justice and deterrence, not death by incarceration. The lake is protected, victims compensated. Reforms prevent others from following her path. Keeping her in prison for her final months serves no purpose except revenge. I don't oppose compassionate release, but I request strict conditions. The hearing room was packed. Victims who wanted Barbara to serve every minute. Others like me who saw no value in prison death. Judge Morrison listened to everyone. Barbara appeared via video from Federal Medical Center. She looked like a shadow of the woman who'd kicked down my door. Gray, thin, fragile. But her eyes were different, the manic intensity replaced by something almost like peace. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Morrison said, "medical reports confirm stage 4 pancreatic cancer with less than 6 months." Multiple victims submitted statements. Some oppose release, others, including Mr. Morrison, don't object under strict conditions. Before I rule, I want to hear from you, not your lawyers. You, what have you learned in 5 years? Barbara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. No rage, no entitlement, just exhaustion and what sounded like genuine remorse. Your Honor, I spent 54 years believing power was the same as worth. I thought controlling people proved I mattered. I destroyed lives because I convinced myself property values were more important than people's peace. I've had 5 years to think about what I did. No apology can fix that. But I finally understand what Mr. Morrison understood all along. Some things matter more than money. Judge Morrison reviewed documents. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm granting compassionate release under the following conditions. Supervised hospice care, no contact with any HOA properties, continued restitution payments, cooperation with educational projects about HOA corruption, no public statements minimizing your crimes. Barbara was released 3 days later to a hospice facility 200 miles from Crystal Lake. News coverage was predictably divided. HOA Karen gets early release versus dying woman granted compassion. I didn't pay much attention. Crystal Lake had moved on. Barbara's release didn't change anything that mattered. But 2 weeks later, I received a package. Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with Barbara's handwriting and a letter. Mr. Morrison, I'm sending you my journal from the past 5 years. Not for sympathy or forgiveness, but because you deserve to know that your fight accomplished something beyond just stopping me. You taught me that power without purpose destroys everything it touches. These pages document my journey from believing I was right to understanding I was monstrous. Use them however you want. They're yours. You earned them by refusing to let me win. Barbara Mitchell. The journal was remarkable. Detailed accounts of her schemes, written with analytical distance, explanations of psychological tactics, honest assessments of how she justified cruelty by calling it community standards. It tracked her gradual transformation from defensive denial to genuine understanding, early entries full of justifications, middle entries wrestling with cognitive dissonance, final entries displaying real comprehension of harm caused. Tom wanted excerpts in his documentary. Sarah wanted them for environmental law courses. Linda wanted to publish them as a case study in how power corrupts. Share them, I decided. Not to redeem Barbara, but to help other people recognize the warning signs before they become Barbara Mitchell. 3 months later, Barbara died in hospice. No dramatic last words. No final manipulation, just a quiet death that ended a life that had caused too much damage. Her funeral was attended by 11 people, her estranged husband, distant relatives, her hospice chaplain, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson from Crystal Lake. "Why did you come?" I asked Mrs. Patterson after the service. "Because I wanted to see it end. Barbara terrorized me for 2 years, made me afraid in my own home, but she's dead now. And I'm still here. I wanted to watch her story end, so mine could continue." The Crystal Lake story became famous in legal circles. Morrison v. Mitchell was taught in law schools. The case spawned over 40 copycat lawsuits against corrupt HOAs across 15 states. Governor Crawford's legislation, the Crystal Lake Protection Act, was adopted by 11 other states. It established strict HOA oversight, mandatory audits, criminal penalties for harassment, and homeowner protections. More importantly, it changed the conversation about HOA. Instead of accepting that neighborhood associations could do whatever they wanted, people started demanding accountability. Tom's documentary won an Emmy and sparked a national movement. HOA reform now became a legitimate political issue. Sarah's environmental work expanded globally. She is now consulting with conservation groups in 12 countries, using lessons from Crystal Lake to protect threatened habitats worldwide. Linda's law practice became a model for public interest work. She trained over 200 lawyers in HOA abuse cases, creating a network of attorneys who could help families fight back. And me, I'm still here on Pop's porch, watching the same sunrise he watched for 40 years. The cabin Barbara tried to steal is now protected forever, not just legally, but in the hearts of people who understand what it represents. Crystal Lake attracted a different kind of resident after Barbara's downfall. People who valued community over control. Families who wanted to raise children where neighbors helped each other. The Volunteer Association became a national model. No mandatory fees, no citation authority, no power-hungry presidents. Just people working together to maintain something beautiful. Property values increased 53% over 5 years. Turns out ethical governance and environmental protection are actually good for real estate value. 10 years after that morning when Barbara kicked down my door, Crystal Lake hosted a reunion. Victims, lawyers, law enforcement, journalists, activists, over 400 people touched by the story. Governor Crawford gave a speech. 10 years ago, one Marine refused to sell his grandfather's cabin. That simple act exposed a criminal network, reformed HOA governance nationwide, and proved that ordinary people can defeat systematic corruption. Wolf Morrison didn't set out to change the world. He just refused to let bullies win. Sometimes that's all it takes. Standing ovation. But I deflected it to everyone else. Sarah's research, Tom's documentation, Linda's legal strategy, honest law enforcement, the neighbors who stood with me. One person can't defeat corruption, I told the crowd, but a community can. We didn't win because I was stubborn. We won because people chose community over fear, truth over convenience, and justice over quiet submission. That night, sitting on the porch with Sarah and Tom, I thought about Pop's words. The land picks you. Crystal Lake had picked me, not because I was special, but because I was there and I refused to give up. Dad, what's the most important lesson from all this? Sarah Askev. That power without accountability always corrupts. That community means more than control. That something's land, water, legacy, integrity matter more than money. And that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with patience, documentation, and refusing to back down when you're right. Pop would be proud. Pop would probably say, I made a mountain out of a molehill and should have just punched Barbara in the nose. We laughed, because that was something Pop might have said. But the truth was deeper. Pop had taught me that some fights matter not because of what you gain, but because of what you protect. I didn't fight Barbara to get rich or famous. I fought her to protect a cabin that represented family, conservation, freedom, and peace. And in protecting that cabin, I'd accidentally protected something bigger, the principle that communities belong to people who care about them, not tyrants who control them. If this story moved you, drop a comment. Have you dealt with HOA corruption? Have you faced bullies who thought power meant they could destroy anything they wanted? Your story matters, and sharing it helps other people find courage to fight back. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about regular people taking down corrupt systems, because there are Barbara Mitchells everywhere, and they only win when good people stay silent. The sun is setting over Crystal Lake now, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Those eagles I fought to protect are teaching their young to hunt. The habitat Barbara tried to destroy is thriving. Pop used to say, a man's legacy isn't what he builds, it's what he protects. I didn't build this lake or this cabin. Pop did, but I protected it from someone who would have destroyed it for profit. Barbara Mitchell is gone. Her criminal empire is dismantled. Her victims have found justice. And Crystal Lake remains exactly what it's always been. A place where eagles soar, water runs clean, and families can sit on porches watching sunsets without fear. That's victory. Not revenge, not destruction of enemies, but preservation of what matters. From all of us at HOA Stories, thanks for hanging out today. If this story had you cheering or cringing or feeling that righteous anger when bullies get what they deserve, go ahead and like this video. Drop a comment with your reaction. We read every single one. Hit subscribe so you're ready for next week's wild story. And remember, you don't need to be a Marine or have political connections or be rich to fight corruption. You just need to refuse to accept that wrong is acceptable. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is saying no and meaning it. Sometimes David really does beat Goliath. Sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for something bigger than himself. Barbara Mitchell learned that lesson too late. But you don't have to. Stand up, fight back. Protect what matters, and never, ever let bullies win, just because fighting is hard. Crystal Lake is proof that it's worth it. My grandfather's cabin is proof that it's possible. And Barbara Mitchell's 18-year sentence is proof that corruption has consequences when good people refuse to stay silent. I'm Wolf Morrison, and this is Crystal Lake. Still standing, still beautiful, still free from tyrants who thought clipboards gave them godlike power. Pop would have loved how this story ended. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with justice served and community protected. He would have sat right here on this porch, drinking his morning coffee, and said, "Wolf, you did good. The land picked right. The land picked right, and Crystal Lake remains a testament to what happens when ordinary people refuse to let corruption win." Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. Keep protecting what matters. And remember, every Barbara Mitchell out there is counting on you staying silent. Don't give them that satisfaction. Thanks for watching. See you next week with another story of justice served, bullies defeated, and regular people proving that courage matters more than power. This is Crystal Lake, where the eagles still soar, the water still runs clear, and Pop's legacy lives on in every sunrise. Peace out.